First class isn't for passengers like you. Step aside. That sentence hit harder than turbulence. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't said behind closed doors. It was delivered cold and direct, out loud. In front of more than 30 travelers lined up at Gate C-14 at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. And it wasn't a question. It was a decision. Made in an instant by a flight attendant who hadn't checked the boarding list, hadn't asked for clarification, hadn't paused for 1 second to consider the truth. Just one glance at the young black girl standing in line, alone, with calm confidence, holding a valid first-class boarding pass, and that judgment came out of her mouth like a verdict. The look in her eyes said the rest. You don't belong here. The tone didn't leave room for correction. The pause afterward, the silence that hung in the air, wasn't confusion. It was humiliation. For Maya Thompson, 17 years old. Those words didn't just interrupt her boarding process. They pierced something deeper. But she didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She stood tall, her grip tightening slightly on the backpack strap over her shoulder, her chin steady, her voice still quiet. This is my seat, she said calmly, holding up her boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class. The flight attendant, Sarah Mitchell, didn't even look down at the ticket. She crossed her arms, shifted her weight, and said, Well, we'll see about that. Before we dive in, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if stories like this move you or make you think, hit like and subscribe. It means more than you know. Now, let's go back to the beginning, the day Maya would never forget. It started with sunlight, bright North Carolina sunlight streaming through the kitchen window back in Raleigh as Maya sat at the table with her parents. Her mom, Denise, was packing an extra mask and hand sanitizer in Maya's bag, the way nurses always do. Her dad, Richard Thompson, a logistics CEO who somehow always found time for his daughter, leaned over and handed her an envelope. Inside was the ticket, first class, Charlotte to Chicago, American Airlines flight AA2317, a gift. You've worked hard, he told her, placing a hand on her shoulder. This leadership conference isn't just for you. It's for every girl who's never been given a seat at the table. And we want you to get there rested, prepared, and proud. Maya smiled and promised to call when she landed. The drive to the airport was quiet, smooth. She replayed her speech in her head, the one she'd be giving to a room full of women leaders in downtown Chicago 2 days from now. The words were strong, clear. She'd practiced for weeks. She was ready. By the time she reached the check-in counter, Maya had everything in order: passport, itinerary, confidence. The attendant at the counter had been polite, even warm. First time flying solo? He asked. She nodded. He smiled. Well, you're in seat 2A, right up front. Enjoy the ride. Things only began to shift when she reached the gate. It was around 4:35 in the afternoon. Gate C-14 was packed. As expected for a late July flight to Chicago, families traveling, suited business people typing away, retired couples reading the paper, everyone tired, everyone waiting for their zone to be called. When they announced boarding for Group 1, Maya stepped forward, first-class ticket in hand. That's when Sarah Mitchell, a tall, sharp-faced flight attendant with a name badge that had seen too many years, stepped between her and the jet bridge. Her eyes scanned Maya from top to bottom. No smile, no greeting, just an immediate wall. First class? She asked, already skeptical. Maya nodded. Seat 2A? Sarah frowned. Can I see your ticket? Maya handed it over. Sarah looked at it, then looked at her, then paused. Then came the words, First class isn't for passengers like you. Step aside. Everything stopped. A few people glanced up. Some frowned. One man with silver hair raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Maya stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said. "This was booked by my father." Sarah didn't budge. "You'll need to wait here. I'll speak with the gate agent." And just like that, the energy shifted. Maya wasn't a student headed to a leadership summit. She was a problem to be dealt with, a disruption, a question mark. As Maya stood there, other passengers boarded. A few brushed past her without eye contact. One woman, elderly, kind eyes, gave her a sympathetic look, but didn't speak. That was Helen Carter, a name Maya wouldn't learn until later. In that moment, Maya simply felt exposed, not because she'd done something wrong, but because someone else had already decided she didn't belong. The humiliation didn't come from being questioned. It came from the assumption, the tone, the ease with which Sarah dismissed her presence. After a moment, the gate agent returned and scanned the pass. "It's valid," she told Sarah. "It's confirmed." But Sarah didn't apologize. She didn't even acknowledge the mistake. She stepped aside and gestured to the jet bridge. "Fine," she said. "Go ahead." But her tone made it clear. This wasn't over. Maya walked down the ramp slowly, feeling dozens of unseen eyes on her back. When she reached the cabin door, another flight attendant greeted her. But without enthusiasm, Maya stepped into first class, placed her bag overhead, and settled into seat 2A. The leather seat was wide, the space comfortable, the cabin quiet. But nothing about it felt peaceful. Her heart beat louder than the hum of the engine. She stared out the window, trying to breathe. The moment should have felt triumphant, but instead, it felt like she'd walked into a room not meant for her, even though she had every right to be there. And that was just the beginning. In the next 10 minutes, everything Maya knew about injustice, courage, and her own voice would be tested. And when the truth came out, the entire flight, the crew, and the airline would never be the same again. Maya had barely buckled her seatbelt in 2A when she noticed the same cold presence stepping into the front cabin. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant who had just humiliated her at the gate. Sarah scanned the cabin like she was checking for intruders, then stopped when her eyes landed on Maya. For a second, nothing happened. Then Sarah turned sharply, walked back toward the galley, and returned a moment later with a tablet in hand. She leaned over slightly, just enough for the nearby passengers to hear, and said with a clipped tone, "I need to see your boarding pass again." Maya looked up, confused. "You already checked it, at the gate." Sarah's voice dropped slightly, but the cold edge remained. "Yes. And now I need to confirm again. There's a possible mismatch in the system. We can't have people in the wrong seats, especially in this section." She didn't say first class out loud this time, but the message was clear. You still don't belong here. Maya reached calmly into the side of her bag and handed her boarding pass over. Around her, a few passengers shifted in their seats, not out of concern, but curiosity. One man, seated across the aisle, raised an eyebrow and watched without expression. That was Robert Klein, a corporate attorney from Charlotte with just enough pride and years in his voice to believe his assumptions were facts. As Sarah examined the boarding pass like it might be counterfeit, Robert leaned slightly forward and muttered, not unkindly but with complete ignorance, "Are you sure you're not in the wrong section, young lady? I've flown this route 100 times and, well, this part of the plane usually isn't." He stopped there, but the pause did all the talking. Maya turned and replied quietly, "This seat was a gift from my father. I'm attending a leadership summit in Chicago." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't apologize, but her jaw tightened. Just then, an elderly woman 2 rows behind, Helen Carter, leaned forward in her seat. She's already shown her pass, and if there's a problem, it certainly isn't her doing. Her voice was soft, but firm. Sarah looked up briefly but said nothing. She didn't want to engage. Instead, she sighed like she was being inconvenienced and tapped a few buttons on the screen. There may have been a booking glitch, she said, not to Maya, but to the air. Until we sort it out, I'll need you to move to an open seat in economy, just temporary. We'll bring you back up if it clears. Maya blinked. Excuse me? Her voice was calm, but this time it cracked just slightly, a sign of both confusion and rising emotion. This is my assigned seat. Sarah didn't budge. We're at full capacity and need to avoid delays. Please collect your things. I'll escort you. The cabin was quiet now. People were definitely listening, but no one stood up. Not yet. Maya looked around. Her seatmates avoided eye contact. Robert turned back to his tablet. One flight attendant stood behind Sarah, silent and unsure. Her name tag read Emily. She looked no older than 25, with warm eyes and a nervous expression. She clearly didn't agree with what was happening, but she also wasn't speaking up. Maya closed her eyes for one brief second. She had promised herself, her parents, and her mentors that she would carry herself with dignity, even under pressure. This wasn't the moment to lose control. Still seated, she said, I'd like to speak with a supervisor, or at least someone who can check the system again, because I know this seat was purchased fairly, and I've done nothing wrong. Sarah stared at her for a moment, and then leaned closer. Miss, if you don't move voluntarily, we will have to involve security. Please don't make this difficult. The warning wasn't loud, but it was threatening. That word, security, echoed in Maya's ears. Not because she was afraid of being wrong, but because she knew how quickly people like her could be labeled aggressive or non-compliant for simply standing their ground. She'd read the stories. She knew the headlines. She was already being watched. Taking a deep breath, Maya nodded. She stood slowly, grabbing her bag, refusing to look at anyone directly. As she stepped past the curtain and down the narrow aisle toward economy, she felt the sting of shame rise in her chest. But it wasn't shame in herself. It was the shame of being publicly dismissed, without cause, in front of people who had chosen silence over justice, near the back of the plane. Sarah gestured to a cramped middle seat between two already seated passengers. You can sit here for now, she said, and then walked away without another word. Maya sat down, her knees brushing the tray in front of her, her long legs barely fit. The air felt hotter, the hum of the engine louder. She stared forward, jaw tight, hands clenched together in her lap. The woman seated to her left, Lisa Harper, a freelance journalist in her 30s, glanced sideways, then leaned slightly toward her. I saw what happened, she said softly. That wasn't okay. Maya nodded, her voice low. It's fine. Lisa shook her head. No, it's not. That wasn't a mistake. That was a message. And people like her send it all the time. She pulled a small notepad from her bag and jotted a few quick notes. Not intrusive, just quiet observation. Maya didn't know what to say. She looked out the window again and took a long breath. Then, pulling her phone from her bag, she called her mother. Mom, she whispered. They moved me out of first class. Denise's voice came sharp and fast. What do you mean? Why? They said there was an issue with the ticket, Maya said, barely holding back emotion. But I think it's something else. Denise didn't ask for details. She didn't press. She just paused, exhaled, and said, You did nothing wrong. Maya, stay calm, and call your father. Maya nodded. Okay. After they hung up, Maya opened her email app and quickly typed a short note to the event organizer in Chicago, just in case her flight was delayed. She kept it professional, but clear. There was an issue with my seat. I may arrive later than planned. Please keep me informed. Back in the economy row. Lisa glanced up from her notes. Are you calling someone who can help? Maya nodded slowly. My dad. He'll know what to do. Lisa nodded once, then whispered. Good. Because I think this might turn into something bigger than just a seat. Maya sat back, staring straight ahead, her phone still in her hand. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She simply opened her contact list and tapped on the name that had never failed her. Dad. The phone began to ring. The phone rang twice before her father picked up. Hey, sweetheart, everything all right? His voice was steady, that calming, commanding tone Maya had known since she was little. Dad, she said as soon as the call connected. They moved me. Her voice was quiet, but the pain in it was unmistakable. They said it was a system issue, but that's not what this is. She looked at me, and I could tell. She didn't even check anything at first. She just decided. On the other end. Richard Thompson's voice remained calm, but the silence between his measured words spoke volumes. Where are you? He asked. Gate C-14, flight AA-2, 317, still on the ground. Richard's voice lowered a notch. I need you to stay calm. You hear me? I'm going to fix this. Sit tight, sweetheart. He hung up, and Maya stared at the screen for a long moment before locking her phone. She didn't know exactly what her father was going to do, but she knew something was already in motion. Across the aisle, Lisa Harper, the freelance journalist seated next to Maya, watched her with concern. You okay? She asked. Maya nodded, though her voice was tight. My dad's handling it. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Is he? Maya glanced at her. He's the CEO of a logistics company in Raleigh. He knows people. Lisa smiled faintly, sensing there was more to it than that. Good, because that woman doesn't deserve to walk away from this without consequences. A few rows ahead, Emily Nguyen passed by with the drink cart. She hesitated when she reached Maya's row, her eyes softening just enough to register empathy. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The shame on her face said she'd witnessed everything, and said nothing. Maya gave her a small nod, forgiving her silently. Emily moved on. Up front in the cockpit, Captain David Sullivan glanced at a discreet message flashing on his tablet. Delay requested. Hold at gate. He raised an eyebrow. There were no weather delays, no mechanical alerts, yet ground control had flagged this plane as not cleared for departure. He didn't argue. Pilots are trained not to question above their pay grade, but something felt different. He turned toward Sarah Mitchell. We've got a 10-minute hold. Technical issue reported. Sarah blinked. With the aircraft? That's what they're saying. David's tone was neutral. He wasn't accusing, but he wasn't buying it either. He noticed how Sarah avoided his eyes. 15 minutes later, Richard Thompson was on the tarmac. Not in line, not in security, but stepping off a private jet that had touched down just minutes ago. He had chartered it the moment he ended the call with Maya. His assistant had already made contact with the airline's regional leadership, and legal counsel was monitoring the situation. Richard didn't arrive with bodyguards or cameras. He arrived alone, in a dark blazer, crisp shirt, and the weight of a man who had built his company from nothing. He was escorted through a side gate, bypassing commercial terminals entirely. By the time he stepped into the jet bridge of flight AA-2317, the flight crew had been alerted that a guest with executive clearance would be boarding. None of them expected him to walk in like he owned the plane, but in many ways, at that moment, he did. Sarah Mitchell was standing at the front, near the galley. When Richard entered, she stiffened immediately. He didn't greet her. "I'm looking for my daughter," he said, his tone flat and direct. "Maya Thompson. You moved her from her assigned seat." Sarah opened her mouth, reaching for a prepared excuse. "There was a system mismatch, sir. A duplicate reservation that—" "No," Richard interrupted. "There was no mismatch, no duplication. What happened here wasn't a system error. It was a judgment call. And you made the wrong one." The silence that followed was suffocating. A few first-class passengers were now openly watching. One even lowered their phone to record discreetly. Richard turned to the cockpit. "I'd like a word with your captain." David Sullivan emerged a moment later, composed but curious. "Captain Sullivan," Richard said, "my daughter was removed from first class without cause. I've already spoken with American's regional office. They're aware I'm here. I'd like her returned to her seat, immediately, and I want an incident report filed." Sullivan gave a slight nod, then looked to Sarah. "Is there a reason this passenger was moved?" Sarah hesitated. "There was a concern about the ticket being in the wrong fare class. It was verified later." "It was verified before you moved her," Richard said, eyes sharp. "Don't lie. Just fix it." Back in economy. Maya's heart was pounding when she saw him enter. Her father walked down the aisle with steady steps, past whispering passengers, past raised phones, past a now silent Lisa who sat upright as if witnessing history. When he reached her, Maya stood. "You didn't have to fly all the way here," she whispered. "I did," Richard said. "Because sometimes presence speaks louder than words." He turned to Lisa. "Thank you for being kind," Lisa smiled. "She's remarkable. You raised her right?" Richard nodded once, then looked back to Maya. "Come on, let's go home, or at least to your rightful seat." Together, they walked back up the aisle. This time, no one looked away. No one stayed silent. As they passed Robert Klein, the older white lawyer who had earlier assumed Maya was in the wrong seat, he shifted uncomfortably and looked down. Helen Carter, the retired teacher, gave Maya an encouraging nod as she passed, and Emmeline Nguyen stood frozen in place, eyes wide, as Richard walked by her without a word. When they returned to 2A, Richard waited until Maya was seated, then turned to Sarah. "My daughter deserves a formal apology, but I won't demand it here. I'll leave that to your superiors, who will be contacting you shortly." Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't. Her face was pale. Her career, in that moment, no longer felt steady. Richard leaned down and kissed Maya's forehead. "I'll be watching from the terminal. Call me when you land." He turned and left the aircraft without looking back. And as the door closed behind him, Maya sat taller than ever before. The flight hadn't even left the ground, but something in the air had shifted. Her father didn't just defend her seat, he defended her place. The door closed behind Richard Thompson with a soft thud, but its impact echoed through the cabin like a drumbeat. The passengers in first class sat straighter, conversations hushed. No one quite knew who he was, but everyone could feel what he represented: authority, clarity, and the undeniable force of a father who refused to let his child be disrespected. Maya sat back down in seat 2A, slowly fastening her seatbelt, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. She stared straight ahead, breathing deeply, trying to steady herself as the realization sank in. She was no longer alone. Her father hadn't just listened, he had acted. And now the spotlight, whether she wanted it or not, was squarely on her. Sarah Mitchell returned to the front of the cabin, her face drawn, her eyes no longer filled with cold confidence but with calculation. She said nothing as she passed Maya's seat, only tightened her jaw and continued into the galley. Seconds later, the intercom crackled. Captain Sullivan's voice came over, composed and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are cleared for departure and will begin taxiing shortly. Please ensure all carry-ons are secured and devices are in airplane mode." The usual script. But something in his tone felt different. Careful. Like he knew eyes were on him now. 2. Maya sat still, her back pressed against the seat, hands in her lap. She felt someone watching her from across the aisle and turned to see Helen Carter, the retired teacher who had spoken up earlier, smiling softly. Helen leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "You did the right thing. And your father. That's a man who raised you to know your worth." Maya nodded gratefully. "Thank you for speaking up. Most people didn't." Helen shrugged. "Silence is easy, but it never changes anything." Just behind them, Robert Klein sat stiffly in his seat, eyes locked on his folded hands. The man who had earlier questioned whether Maya was in the right section now looked like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. He didn't speak. He didn't apologize. But his silence now came with a different weight. Not ignorance, but shame. A few rows back, Lisa Harper still sat in her economy seat, scribbling quickly in her notebook. She had seen it all, the removal, the walk back, the father's entrance, and her journalistic instincts told her this wasn't just a moment. It was a story, one that too many people would recognize, and too few would admit to. She jotted down the names she remembered: Sarah, Emily, the gate number, the seat assignment. She even made a quick note about Captain Sullivan's demeanor. She would follow up. She would reach out to the airline. But more importantly, she would write the truth, and Maya would not be erased from it. As the plane began to taxi, Sarah returned to the cabin and began the safety demonstration with forced professionalism. She avoided eye contact with Maya and moved through the steps like a robot. Emily Nguyen, on the other hand, stood across the aisle, visibly shaken but trying to hold it together. When she reached Maya's row, she hesitated. Then, quietly, as she checked Maya's seatbelt, she leaned in and whispered, "I'm sorry. I should have said something earlier. What she did wasn't right." Maya glanced at her and gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered back. It was the first acknowledgement from anyone in uniform, and while it didn't erase what had happened, it mattered. In this moment, it mattered a lot. 10 minutes into the air, Sarah came down the aisle with a tray of drinks. When she reached Maya's row, she didn't speak, just placed a glass of water on the tray table and moved on. No apology, no eye contact, just silence. But the gesture didn't go unnoticed. Passengers nearby watched the interaction, and it was clear they were now viewing Sarah with a different lens, not as a professional, but as the person who had caused all of this, and the shift in energy was palpable. At cruising altitude, Captain Sullivan stepped out of the cockpit and into the first-class cabin, an uncommon move mid-flight. He approached Maya's seat and knelt slightly to speak at eye level. "Miss Thompson," he said quietly, "I'd like to offer a formal apology on behalf of the crew. What happened at boarding was not in line with our policies or our values." Maya didn't blink. "I appreciate that," she said calmly, her voice steady. "But I didn't just lose a seat. I lost dignity. In front of strangers. That's not something a drink or a seat upgrade can fix." Captain Sullivan nodded slowly. "I understand. There will be a full internal report filed. I've already submitted a note to our regional office. I've also logged your original seat assignment and your treatment today. I hope you'll receive the follow-up you deserve." Maya gave him a polite nod, but inside, She was already preparing for more. Not revenge, not outrage, just truth and consequences. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Helen leaned over again and said, "You speak like someone far older than 17. Maya chuckled softly. "That's what my mom says." Helen smiled. "Your mom's right." In that moment, the plane felt quieter, not just because the engines drowned out the cabin noise, but because the tension had shifted, not erased, but transformed. Maya was no longer seen as a misplaced teenager. She was now the face of something bigger, something many passengers would think about long after landing, an hour before landing. Maya pulled out her tablet and opened the speech she was set to deliver at the Leadership Summit in Chicago. Her fingers hovered over the screen. The original speech had been about rising above stereotypes and seizing opportunity. But now, she had lived an entirely new experience, one that had tested her poise, her confidence, and her identity in real time. She deleted the first paragraph, then the second, and slowly, she began to rewrite. The title changed first. "When They Tell You You Don't Belong." The rest flowed naturally, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of clarity. This story, her story, would no longer be something she had to hide. It would become her message, her voice. The flight continued. Drinks were served, trays collected. The crew went through the motions. But Maya? She was already miles ahead, in spirit, in purpose, in strength. Her seat may have been temporary, but her presence, that was permanent. She had faced the insult. She had endured the silence. And now, she was writing the answer, not just for herself, but for every girl who had ever been told to step aside. By the time Flight AA2317 began its descent into Chicago, the cabin had quieted. But the weight of what had happened earlier still lingered. The air felt heavier in first class, not from altitude, but from awareness. People had witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Not just a boarding error, not just a delay. They had seen a young black girl wrongly removed from her seat, humiliated, and then quietly returned. Not because someone did the right thing, but because her father arrived and forced the right thing to happen. And now, with the city lights beginning to flicker below the wing, that silent tension was finally about to break. It began with a voice, one that had waited long enough. Maya turned slightly in her seat and looked toward the aisle. Sarah Mitchell had just passed through again, avoiding eye contact, avoiding any acknowledgement of what she had done. Maya sat up straighter, then slowly reached down and pressed the call button above her seat. A soft chime rang through the cabin. Sarah paused at the front. She knew who pressed it. She turned around, hesitated, and then walked back toward Maya's seat. Her face was carefully blank. "Yes?" she asked. Her tone clipped but neutral. Maya didn't smile. "I think we need to talk," she said. Her voice calm but firm. Sarah glanced around. Passengers were already turning their heads. A few pretended not to listen. Most didn't bother pretending. "We're preparing for landing," Sarah said, shifting slightly. "Now's not the best time." "You're right," Maya said. "The best time would have been before you asked me to leave this seat. But you didn't give me that chance. So now, I'm taking mine." The words weren't loud, but they carried, with intention, and with the kind of quiet power that makes people stop scrolling and start listening. Sarah took a breath, but Maya didn't stop. "When you saw me standing in line, you assumed I didn't belong here. You didn't check my name. You didn't ask questions. You just looked at me and decided I wasn't worth the seat I paid for. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. And choices like that don't just inconvenience people, they humiliate them. You made me walk down that aisle like I was being punished, while everyone else watched and stayed silent. And the only reason I'm back in this seat right now is because someone with power showed up. But I shouldn't have to know someone, or have a last name that opens doors, just to be treated with basic dignity. You did this to me in front of strangers, so I'm going to say this out loud. In front of them. Sarah's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Behind Maya. Helen Carter gave a soft, audible, like a Sunday school teacher witnessing truth. Across the aisle. Robert Klein shifted uncomfortably again, this time with more than shame. There was recognition in his eyes now, the beginning of self-reflection. Further back. Emmeline Nguyen stopped pushing the cart and watched from her corner. Eyes wide. Lisa Harper, seated in economy, had already unzipped her backpack and pulled out her voice recorder. She hadn't expected this moment to come mid-flight, but now that it was happening, she knew exactly what to do. The recorder blinked red. She caught every word. Maya continued, her voice unwavering. I'm not speaking just for myself. I'm speaking for every girl who's been told to be quiet, to move, to shrink, because someone decided she didn't fit the room she walked into. I earned this seat. I belonged here before you even looked at my name. And the way you treated me is part of something much bigger than a flight delay or a boarding mistake. It's about the way people see value, or choose not to. And I'm not going to sit quietly and let it happen again. Not to me. Not to anyone. There was a pause. Heavy and full. Sarah stood frozen, caught in the center of something she couldn't control anymore. The power had shifted. And this time, it wasn't because of Richard Thompson. It was because of Maya, because of her words, because of her voice. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried. But she had drawn a line. And everyone in that cabin knew it, Sarah finally said, almost mechanically. I'll note your comments in the report. I'm not asking for a report, Maya replied. I'm asking for accountability. And if it doesn't happen here, it will happen after we land. Because I've already spoken with a reporter, and I've already rewritten my speech. This story's going to be heard, whether you want it to or not. Sarah turned and walked back toward the galley. But she didn't walk the same way. Her shoulders were stiff, her steps shorter. The pride she carried earlier had cracked, as the captain announced final descent. The cabin went quiet again. But it wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was reflection. Helen leaned over again, whispering, You just taught this entire plane a lesson in grace under fire. Maya exhaled slowly. I didn't plan it. It just needed to be said. Helen smiled. The best truths usually do. When the plane touched down at O'Hare, and the wheels hit the tarmac, applause broke out, not the usual kind. This one was slower, scattered at first, then steady, a few claps in the back, then near the middle, and finally in first class. Not for the landing, not for the flight, but for Maya, for her courage, for her voice. Lisa Harper turned off the recorder and slipped it into her jacket. She already knew the title of her article. She didn't belong until she spoke. As passengers stood to deplane, many glanced Maya's way. Some gave a soft smile, some nodded, a few even mouthed. Thank you. Maya stood tall, gathered her bag, and turned to Helen. It was nice meeting you. Helen patted her hand. I'll be telling my grandkids about this flight. Robert Klein stepped into the aisle beside her. For a moment, he looked like he might keep walking, but he didn't. He stopped. Miss Thompson, he said, clearing his throat. I owe you an apology. I was wrong earlier, and I'll be thinking about what you said. A lot. Maya looked him in the eye and simply said, Thank you. Then she turned and walked off the plane, not like a passenger, not like a teenager, but like a leader, in the terminal. as she stepped into the flow of foot traffic. Her phone buzzed. A message from her dad. "Proud of you. I watched the whole thing from the gate window. You didn't just reclaim your seat. You changed the whole flight." Maya smiled, her feet moving forward. She hadn't planned to speak up, but once the words started, they wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. The next morning, Maya woke up in her hotel room in downtown Chicago to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications poured in from every app, emails, texts, Instagram tags, and unfamiliar numbers lighting up her screen like fireworks. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and tapped on one of the dozens of message previews. It was from her classmate back in Raleigh. "You're all over the news. Is this real? I'm crying." Confused, she opened her browser and typed her name. The first result hit her like a wave. "Teen reclaims first-class seat," then her voice, "and silences the cabin." Byline, Lisa Harper. There it was, her photo, taken discreetly during the flight, showed her standing up, chin lifted, speaking with Sarah Mitchell frozen beside her. The headline was already trending. The article itself was measured, powerful, and piercing. Lisa had captured everything: the removal from first class, her father's unexpected appearance, the cabin's silence, and most importantly, Maya's speech. She didn't embellish, she didn't dramatize, she told the truth, and that truth was louder than any microphone. As Maya scrolled through the thousands of comments beneath it, she saw a flood of support. Strangers from New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and even abroad were reposting it with captions like "Grace under pressure." "This is how change starts," and "Never underestimate the calm ones." And amid the supportive voices, a few hateful ones trickled in, accusing her of making it about race, of playing victim. But even those were drowned out by the overwhelming chorus of people who got it. She heard a knock at her door. It was Denise, her mother, who had flown in late the night before. She stepped inside, still in her travel clothes, and pulled Maya into a long, silent hug. "Your father and I watched the video from 3 different angles," she whispered, brushing Maya's hair back. "I've never been more proud of anything in my life." Maya hugged her back, trying to absorb the moment. "I didn't plan it. Mom, I just couldn't stay quiet." Denise nodded. "You shouldn't have. And you didn't." They sat together for a moment before Maya glanced at the clock. "The summit starts in an hour." Denise smiled. "Then you better get dressed. The world is waiting on you now." By the time Maya arrived at the conference center, the event staff was already buzzing with excitement. Her name badge had a small gold sticker added to it that read, "Keynote Adjusted." When she walked into the main hall, the room, filled with young women from across the country, mentors and organizers, broke into soft applause, not orchestrated, not polite, genuine. Many had read the article already, some had seen the grainy cell phone videos, and all of them felt the undercurrent of something real, something close to them, rise up through Maya's story. The event director approached her backstage and gently touched her arm. "You don't need to read your original speech if you're not feeling it," she said. "You've already made your statement to the world." Maya shook her head. "I rewrote it this morning. I think I know exactly what I want to say." When she walked onto the stage, the lights were soft, the podium simple, and the audience quiet in anticipation. Maya stood still for a second, scanning the room, then began. "I wasn't planning to make national news this week. I was just planning to represent my school, my family, and my goals, in a clean outfit and with a well-practiced speech. But life had a different plan." A few people chuckled softly. She continued. "Yesterday, I was told I didn't belong in a first-class seat. I was told that without words, through assumptions and actions, and for a moment, I thought maybe I should stay quiet, be polite, don't make it worse. But then I remembered something my dad once told me. He said, "Never let someone else's ignorance shrink the size of your voice." The room nodded. Some even clapped. "So I spoke," Maya said, her voice steady. "Not just for myself, but for every girl who's ever been made to feel too young, too black, too out of place to deserve space, comfort, or respect." I didn't fight back with anger. I didn't shout. I told the truth. Out loud. And now, that truth has reached places I never expected. Her voice caught just slightly, and she smiled. And if you ever find yourself in a place where someone tells you to step aside, don't just sit back down quietly. Ask why. Stand up. Speak. You might not just be reclaiming your seat. You might be reclaiming someone else's future. The room erupted in applause. Not polite, not rehearsed, but sustained and powerful. Maya stepped back from the mic, heart racing, and knew something had shifted. After the speech, dozens of attendees approached her, some in tears, others speechless. Many just wanted to say thank you. One girl, about 15, with braids and braces, said quietly, "I've been scared to speak up when stuff like that happens, but I won't be anymore." Maya smiled and said, "You have every right to speak. Never forget that." Later that afternoon, a representative from American Airlines called her father directly. The company had seen the article, the footage, the public backlash. They offered a formal apology, assured them that Sarah Mitchell had been placed on administrative leave, and promised a full review of their sensitivity training protocols. Richard didn't accept any compensation. He didn't ask for a meeting. All he said was, "Make sure my daughter is the last one who goes through that. Ever." Emily Nguyen, the young flight attendant who had stayed silent during the incident, reached out via email. In her message, she wrote, "I'm sorry I didn't do more, but because of you. I've already spoken to HR and filed my own statement. I'm ready to stand up now, too." Maya replied the next morning with a single sentence. "It's never too late to do the right thing." That became the closing quote of Lisa Harper's follow-up article, published 2 days later, titled, "First Class Truth: What One Teen Taught Us About Belonging," in her hotel room that night. Maya lay in bed with her phone face down, the notifications still coming in, but she wasn't reading them anymore. She stared at the ceiling, headphones in, listening to soft jazz, something her dad had taught her to do when she needed to recharge. The world had heard her now, but it was what she told herself that mattered most. And what she told herself, quietly, without fanfare, was this: "I am enough. I have always been enough." 2 days later, Maya stepped off the plane in Raleigh, her carry-on slung over one shoulder, her sweatshirt slightly wrinkled from the long flight. She scanned the crowd just beyond the security gate and spotted her parents instantly. Richard in a navy polo and jeans, Denise in her hospital scrubs with her coat still in hand. They weren't holding signs or balloons. They didn't need to. Their smiles said everything. As Maya approached, her father wrapped her in a long, quiet hug. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't need to. "You good?" he asked softly. Maya nodded against his chest. "Yeah, I'm really good." Denise pulled her into a hug next, whispering, "You didn't just speak. You moved people." They walked together through the terminal, Richard carrying Maya's bag even though she insisted she could handle it. Outside, the air smelled like summer rain, warm pavement and honeysuckle. Raleigh felt quieter now, slower than Chicago, but exactly what she needed. In the car, her parents asked about the conference, the speech, the reporters. Maya answered in her usual calm way, never dramatic, never bragging. She mentioned how the keynote had gone viral, how 3 different universities had already invited her to speak next spring, and how one nonprofit had reached out asking if she'd consider helping them mentor other young women of color. Richard smiled in the rearview mirror. Just another week for Maya Thompson. Maya rolled her eyes and laughed. Right. That evening, she sat on the front porch of their house, feet up on the railing, sipping lemonade from the glass her mom had handed her. The sky was turning golden pink. Crickets were beginning to hum. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. But this time, she turned it face down, not because she didn't care, but because she no longer needed outside affirmation to feel seen. She had spoken, and she had been heard. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. It was the handwritten copy of her speech, the one she'd rewritten on the plane just before the summit. She unfolded it slowly, rereading her own words. They didn't feel distant or polished. They felt like her, centered, steady, growing. For the first time in days, she let herself sit in silence. No headlines, no questions, just peace. Inside. Her parents were talking softly over dinner. Denise glanced out the window and said, "She hasn't been the same since that flight." Richard nodded. "She's always had that strength. The world just hadn't seen it yet." He paused, then added, "Now they have." That night, Maya went to bed early, before turning off the light. She checked her email one last time, among the clutter. One message stood out. It was from Emmeline Nguyen, a short note, but a powerful one. "Because of you, I've spoken up about what I saw. I've decided to leave the airline. I'm going back to school to study social work. I want to be part of something that heals, not hides. Thank you." Maya stared at the screen for a moment, then hit reply. She typed just 6 words. "I believe in your next chapter." The following Sunday at church, their pastor briefly mentioned Maya in his sermon, not by name, but everyone in the room knew who he meant. "Sometimes the youngest voice in the room carries the oldest wisdom," he said, after the service. Friends and neighbors came up to the Thompsons with hugs and kind words. A few teachers from Maya's high school had already printed out Lisa Harper's article and taped it outside the counselor's office with the caption, "Local student shows us all how to lead." But through it all, Maya stayed grounded. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't trying to become a symbol. She just wanted to be the kind of person who didn't let fear or bias have the last word. That afternoon, while helping her mom fold laundry, Maya looked up and asked, "Do you think people will still care in a week?" Denise paused. "Maybe. Maybe not. That's not what matters. What matters is what you do next." Maya nodded slowly, taking that in. Later that night, she opened a fresh document on her laptop and typed a title, "Belonging, a guide for young women to speak up." It wouldn't be a book, not yet, but maybe a blog, a newsletter, something simple, something real. She didn't want to go viral again. She wanted to build something lasting. As the sun set that evening, Maya sat by her window, looking out at the yard where she used to ride her bike. The world outside hadn't changed much. The grass still needed cutting. The same dog barked down the street. But she had changed. And now, with the wind quiet against the glass and her future unfolding in front of her, Maya whispered to herself, not for anyone else to hear, "I belonged in that seat. I belong in every room I walk into." And from that moment on, she never questioned it again. Thank you for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support means the world. We'll see you in the next story. Take care.